welcome everyone. This is really Greg Shannon's meeting from the Calgary M&A Club. He's a senior partner with Gowlings in M&A. He's been our chapter president there for some time. He's got Adam and Jon today who have an amazing story, but I'll leave that for later. As for the M&A Club, we're still expanding. With regulations easing now, London and Oshawa, Ontario will be coming on this fall with live meetings. New York City will feature a chapter probably in October. We'll have our first US club there. We're working on that now. We're in development is a small US website, which will be linked to the Canadian and vice versa. What else? The gala is for Quebec deals, or from any province, as long as one of the parties, buy, sell, finance, whatever, is based in Quebec, or the advisors based in Quebec. That's an M&A Awards Gala. It'll be our fourth. Last year we did a video presentation of the awards, but in any case, we'll have a live, hopefully 400 people, if not 300 or whatever we're allowed. That's November 18th, and it's a tremendous event. The forum, which we always have every year, the all-day forum, will be now March 2022, whatever it is, the middle of March. We're developing a special way of searching for a member, because we have now 1,400 members almost across Canada, and a few from the States and other places. But there'll be a search. You'll search by province and then by expertise. There's about 40 different professions there where you can search for bridge financing in Vancouver or whatever it is. That's coming on very, very soon, as well as the deal listing, which we send out now in a PDF every 2 weeks. That'll also be interactively available for members on Salesforce community, because we're deeply involved actually with Salesforce. And I guess that's about it. This is webinar number 87, I think it is, since April 7th last year. So we're very pleased with the way the community has taken this up. And it's a great testament to our presenters, including the ones this morning, who, as I say, have quite an amazing story. As a little bit of an entrepreneur myself, I can only dream of the success that Adam and Jon have enjoyed. In any case, I'll pass it over to Greg.
Welcome everybody to the M&A Club Western Canada, Calgary, Vancouver chapters webinar on the first day of summer. And we have two great speakers and an exciting story dealing with Canada Brokerlink. So first of all, we have Adam Joyce. Adam has over 20 years of accelerating, transforming, and growing company experience. He's experienced in leading teams with brand activation. He's built 11 startups from scratch. He's had 9 corporate expansions and 3 successful turnarounds. I've worked with Adam before on the Association of Corporate Growth Calgary's chapter board. And Adam has also worked with TELUS Convention Center, Business Instincts, Canada Brokerlink, and the Association for Corporate Growth. Next, we have Jon Ouellette. Jon is the former CEO of Canada Brokerlink. Jon has over 40 years of experience as a senior executive in leading and owning companies, including ventures and financial services, oil and gas, real estate, and Canada's largest independently owned insurance brokerage. So I'm going to turn it over to Jon and Adam, and you can begin telling us the great story of Canada Brokerlink and the big exit that you guys had.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, where you're coming in from. I'll just do a little bit of preamble, and I'm going to hand it off to Jon. And one footnote, I will be quickly leaving, coming and going as it happens. I'm having some work done on the house, and a contractor just rang my doorbell. So I apologize for jumping in and out. I've known Jon for 18 years, met him back in 2002. And then we worked on and off together in Canada Brokerlink up until about 2007. One of the things that I key in on this story as it relates to the M&A Club is we talk about the many factors and the technical and operational factors of M&A. But in this story, I was most struck by and mentored by Jon in terms of leadership and culture. And leadership and culture being not just one of the elements, but a key element to the success that we enjoyed on this journey. And I invite you to interact with us, ask your questions, and we're going to have a good time this afternoon, this morning on the M&A Club. So John, they're all yours, and I'll be back in a moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us today. I just want to tell you a little bit about the story that we had at Canada Brokerlink. And it starts from the fact that it was a consolidation play in the insurance industry. So property casualty insurance brokers were being consolidated by 2 or 3 different players. So first of all, what is a property casualty insurance broker? That's what you see. That's your average broker that you see on the street. You probably have your home insurance or auto with a property casualty broker. They typically represent multiple markets as opposed to direct writers like Cooperators, State Farm, and Geico that are direct writers. They are the manufacturer and the sales team at the same time. Brokers normally have multiple markets and provide choice to consumers. So why consolidation in the insurance industry? And this happened back, it was around 1995, 96 that it really started to get traction, and continues today, but in a completely different form, actually. So what was happening at the time? Most brokers were owned by someone who had been around, an aging owner who had been there maybe 30 years or more. And they didn't really have good succession plans. The second part, which was really critical, was that insurance companies were recognizing that there was an increasing cost of doing business with a broker. And in order to make sense of that relationship, they had to have a bigger piece of the pie, if you will. And so brokers were constantly under pressure to continue to put more business with a particular market, or the market would cancel them. And they would have one fewer market to deal with. Now, brokers can only they can't make up business. They can only sell so much in a year. So if a broker had 10 markets and all of a sudden got pressure on volume, they'd go to 8, and then to 7, and then to 6. And so what was happening was the availability of market for brokers was shrinking. And the only way to really access more markets was to combine their efforts with other brokers. And there were a variety of ways they tried to do that, buying groups and different things. But then somebody got the bright idea that if they formed a public company to buy brokers, there was an opportunity to leverage, because the P&E ratio was a lot higher than what they could buy brokers for. So at the time, brokers typically transacted, they're running maybe 25% EBITDA, and they would sell for about 6 times. Now, in the brokerage industry, the interesting thing is the benchmark actually became 1.5 times revenue, which was really equated to 6 times net earnings at 25%. But you got to remember, the 1.5 times is critical, because that's what got in people's heads. Over time, the public market was able to buy brokers at 6 times bottom line, and then in the market they were actually trading at 10 to 12. So there was an instant increase in value to the asset from their perspective, and it made tremendous sense. And then, of course, they could start to offer a little bit more money, and the multiple started to go from 1.5 times top line to 1.8 to 2 times. And by the time I got out, they were up to around 3.5 times. Now, the interesting thing is, as a broker, you can't afford to buy other brokers at that multiple, because you can't make it work. And that's where the dynamics got really interesting, and how it shifted to where it is today. So anyway, we were I had a brokerage network that I built up over a number of years in Northwestern Ontario. We had about 9 brokers at the time, brokerages, I should say. And we were doing about $35 million in revenue. Canada Brokerlink had gone public, I think it was around November 96 or something like that. And they were about 40 million in revenue at that point in time. There were 3 different consolidators that had gone public that were in the space, 2 in Ontario and Canada Brokerlink in Alberta. And so we were entertaining options with all 3 of them, actually, and we ended up making a decision to go with Canada Brokerlink for a variety of reasons. And we sold that brokerage in 1997. At that time, I became the regional vice president of Ontario, and continue to expand and buy more brokerages in Ontario and then run that operation for them. Over time, we bought somewhere around $70 million in revenue of other brokers in Ontario, in the north and in southern and southwestern Ontario. At the time, we were only really in Alberta and Ontario. We weren't in Quebec or Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or in BC. Over time, so say fast forward a couple of years, one of the fundamental things about an acquisition like that, a consolidator, is that you do have some centralized costs that are building up. You know, you've got a head office, you've got centralized systems, you've got people out on the acquisition trail, you know, those types of things. So when you're buying the brokers, the idea is that you try to reduce as much as possible the non-broker facing activities and centralize those so that you can reduce the costs and continue to make money. What was happening was that when the acquisitions were being made, too many of the vendors were being brought into the fold as part of the transaction as vice presidents or in some senior role, and continuing to have some kind of income from the business on top of what they'd been paid. Well, what that's started to do, of course, was balloon the centralized costs and reduce the actual net profit. So the organization started to go from a net of 25% to 20 to 15 to 10. Many of you will remember our former Minister of Finance, Don Mazinkowski, who was on the board of directors at the time. And I remember at dinner one night in Calgary, Don said, you know, the bigger we get, the less money we make. I don't think that's sustainable. And I mean, that was the turning point because he'd had it. And, you know, there was just, it was not working. At the same time, the acquisition team was out there buying brokers now at 2 times and 2.25 times. But what was originally 6 times net income at 1.5, well, the 25% net income was down to 10%. And you're starting to, you know, you're starting to buy it 2.25 times top line. Well, that's way more than 10 or 12 times EBITDA. And that didn't matter. They just kept buying. That was the problem is, and I think everybody's seen it, that public companies that start to acquire get kind of caught up in their own story, and that acquisition and growth is more important than the actual operation and bottom line profit. And it was clear that that's what was happening in that particular organization at the time. So I went out and met with Don and the board, and they asked me to come and just do an analysis of what was happening with operations because Ontario was still profitable and continuing to make money, and Alberta at the time wasn't. And so we looked at what happening, and we realized that we had to make some pretty significant shifts in the operation. And so they actually relieved a number of people, made them available for other positions in other companies. I think we lost about 13 senior executives, and I ended up taking over the organization with the 3 people that had been running operations for me in Ontario. And at that point, the board said, well, what we want to do now is we want to either buy somebody large and bring the companies together or sell. And so the decision was made to actually sell the organization at that time. It was about 140 million, I guess, at that moment. And there had been a lot of conversation with other public companies, but interestingly, Allianz AG, a large insurer, global, out of Munich, Germany, made an offer and the board accepted it. So at that time, we went from a public company to a private company. Now, one of the interesting side notes is that when they bought it at a price that matched the outstanding options that all the employees had. And it was also significantly below the value of any shares that any vendor had taken in the transaction when they had vended into the organization. So from the very beginning, it was an acrimonious relationship at best between the insurer and the brokerage. and an unusual circumstance where we were now owned by effectively the manufacturer of the product. The one thing I will say about Allianz is they're a pretty good manager, and they were really good about maintaining the integrity of the brokerage, which was that we still had multiple markets. Allianz wanted to aggregate more of the business into their own operation, but they were doing it by being competitive. They were doing it by working hard with the brokers inside Brokerlink to try to build their volume. They weren't forcing us to move business in any particular way, which allowed the broker to continue to be successful, because we were actually the largest broker for about 20 of the top insurance companies in Canada. And it was really moving along well because we were able to compete just about anywhere. The interesting thing was that Brokerlink was not buying large brokers. They were buying brokers in communities and cities all over the country, or all over Alberta and Ontario, that were competing with other small and medium-sized brokers. We weren't competing with the Aons of the world. We were competing with the broker down the street. Well, the broker down the street had maybe 3 or 4 markets. But Canada Brokerlink, because of its size, had almost every major market in Canada and had a significant penetration with them. So we had some pretty good deals with these different organizations. It made us really successful. So Allianz continued to, well, first of all, what they did was, and it was really interesting because I got a call one day because I didn't know what was going to happen after the deal. And I was with my family in Banff, and I got a call from the CFO from Allianz in Germany. And he said, John, we're having a board meeting tonight and we're making a presentation. We just realized we haven't asked you if you'll be the president. They'd interviewed me, but nobody had asked me, right? So at that point, I said, sure, send the offer. And I was on my way to Lake Louise to Jasper, I was on my way to Lake Louise to stay at the chateau, because I thought it could be the end of my time in Alberta, and I want to take advantage of it. So we spent a night at Banff Springs, a night at the chateau. It was a great long weekend with my family. So I got to the chateau, I got this offer, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And I signed the offer. They went to the board meeting, and I became president of Canada Brokerlink under Allianz now as a private company. One of the interesting things was that Allianz already had a fairly significant brokerage operation called Oxford Insurance, and they wanted us to merge. So now we've gone from doing a bunch of individual acquisitions to where we now were merging with a company that was about 2/3 the size of us. So now you've got all these little cultures around, and you've got this large entity that now you're merging with that's been used to doing things their own way as well. And so we had to really start thinking about what we were doing from that perspective. But at the same time, it was really looking at the operations, the integrity of the centralized operations, as I refer to them, the non-client facing activities. So whether it was IT and centralizing operating systems, finance and having all the payables, trade payables and other payables from the individual brokerage offices centralized, all of those things we started to work on to really make it make sense. When I took over, there were multiple operating systems. Brokers had 3 or 4 different options for operating systems for the insurance brokerage industry. And it was impossible for us to really move forward with multiple systems. And of course, everybody that had their system thought theirs was the best. Nobody wanted to move. And it took some convincing, from a cultural perspective, to have people get that if we ever wanted to have an improved system of any type, we had to get on one system. Then everybody could have a contribution in what the system would be going forward, but we needed to get on one system. And to do that, we needed to build some trust. And so that was a big part of what we started to work on in that whole cultural piece, which I'll talk about in a minute. This is pre-cloud, I have to add. So this was my last experience with a server farm. And I'm so glad that I won't ever have that experience again. But when I took over, there were servers in hallways. There were servers on carpets. They were surrounded by plastic to reduce the dust. But there was no fire suppression system. There was no static guard. There was nothing, right? So we had to build a server room, which we did. We built a proper server room with all of the features that were required to centralize the system. which worked well, and except for one day when somebody pushed the emergency shut button instead of the unlock door button and shut the entire company down for a matter of about 3 hours. But those things happen from time to time. Anyway, we got it done. We were really doing a pretty good job of the centralization, all the finances, all the IT, HR, everything was centralized. Now, what I was really looking at was, how do we make the culture? We were almost 500 million. We had 65 locations. We acquired over 30 companies, and we had around 650 people. How do you make that culture actually function as a single entity, with one vision, one management team, and one identity? Some of these enterprises, especially in Southwestern Ontario, those brokerages, one of them had been around for 101 years. So the idea of a name change was pretty significant, not to mention the fact that they had a pretty entrenched culture as well. And so what we did was we brought in a transformational leadership consultant, somebody that I was introduced here in Calgary, and somebody that I actually do some work with today. And he started to work with our senior leadership team and have us see what it was to be a leader from a different perspective. That work is actually really interesting because it works from what is referred to as an ontological approach. In other words, the study or science of being, what it is to be a leader as opposed to emulate a leader or act like a leader, but to actually be a leader. We've all seen movies with A actors where you'd swear they were the character. And then you've seen the B movies where it's kind of like you can't take them seriously because you can tell they're trying to be the character, but they're not pulling it off. That's what it's like with a leader. The difference between a leader who's being a leader as opposed to one who's emulating leadership, who's trying to act like a leader from a book they've read. But when you get to really understand what it is to be a leader, it becomes your natural self-expression, and it makes a significant difference in the organization. Probably within about a year of working with my senior leadership team, I had managers saying things to me like, I don't know what you're doing to the senior leadership team, but I want some of that. Because they could see there was a difference in the way that people were behaving. As a consequence, we were able to really build the trust with the organization. We did some really remarkable things, I think. We did what we called a roadshow, where the whole senior leadership team went to 5 cities across the 2 provinces. And we brought about an average of 100 to 130, 150 people into each location. And in each location, we introduced the senior leadership team. We'd made a video of some of the people that were on the leadership team and others that were really close about what inspired them to be in the organization. And it really had people engaged. And then we broke off into what we called a cafe. And I think the cafe was one of the most significant things we did because at each table of 8 or 10 people, they were challenged with what are 3 things that the company could do to support them in actually living our vision. It wasn't what can they do, it was what can we do? Because we realized there were a lot of things that weren't going the way people wanted and they needed help. And so we asked them and they told us. And unlike often happens in those circumstances, we didn't just write the things down and go away. One of the offices, for example, said, you know what, we've got 25 people here. Our computers are 7 years old. We really need new computers. And you might think, okay, well, that's great. But our IT manager would stand up in a circumstance like that and say, okay, I got it. And I promise that we will deliver those computers to your office within 60 days. And we'll take care of that. And people got, as these things went on, and that was maybe a little more major than some things, but people got the experience of what we call being heard. They weren't just listened to, they were heard. We actually said, yeah, we're going to do something with what you've asked us. And this is what we're going to do. And then we actually published a paper that said what we were going to do and when we were going to do it by. And we followed up every 90 days. When we went to the second city and people asked us often the same questions, we didn't say, yeah, we heard that at the last place. We just said, yeah, we hear you. And our senior leader would get up and make the same offer he made at the last place. and people had the experience of being heard. And when we talked about the things that we were going to do, we didn't say we were asked to do this here. We just said, we've been asked to purchase X number of computers for offices, and we're going to have them done by this time. We're doing this change to the system. Everybody that had asked for that then had the experience that it was them that actually that drove it forward. I had a senior employee who'd been with one of the vendor companies for probably 30 years. And when I was doing one of these roadshows, she was sitting there with her arms folded. And I said, so what do you think? And she said, well, to be honest, Jon, I've heard this all many times before. I've heard lots of people stand up and say, we're going to do what we say we're going to do, and we're going to do these things for you. And I said, I get that. I can appreciate it. But here's the deal. I'm going to come back in 6 months and ask you, how did we do? And will you tell me? And she said, yeah, I will. And so 6 months later, I asked her. It was really quite funny because she just shook her head and she said, Jon, I hate to admit it, you guys actually do what you say you're going to do. And it was that process of taking on leadership inside our team, of going out into the organization and listening and being heard, being transparent and authentic about what wasn't working, and then actually committing to make some things happen, and then doing what we said. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. It takes a lot for an organization to come together like that and really build a sense of trust inside the group. The consequence of that was that our retention, when I took over, was horrible. Our customer retention was like in the 80s, and it's supposed to be in the low 90s to mid 90s. Our employee retention was at 65%. We were losing our entire staff at that rate every 3 years. It was incredible. It was a mess. And it's because there was no trust, it was disorganized, and there was no vision that actually had people moving forward that they could buy into. So as a consequence of taking actual action inside of the operational side of things, but more importantly, building trust inside the organization to have them agree, not only did it continue to evolve, but the company was able to transition again. And Allianz sold the organization to ING, now Intact. And the company still exists today and is the largest consolidator in the insurance brokerage industry in North America for that matter, but certainly in Canada. And ING has a right of first refusal with about 50+% of the brokers in Canada as a consequence of what they've been able to prove over time. So it was really an interesting thing. And just as a side note, I retired from that industry in 2007 and from that company, but I took the methodology with me. And I brought the same guy and the same team in to work with a new company I started. And I brought him in to work with only the 3 owners. We started from scratch and we built an engineering company. And over 10 years, we built it to 100 people and sold it, fortunately, in 2015 as oil hit $29 and that industry almost disappeared, that engineering side of things. But we would never have accomplished that in 10 years without the kind of transformational work we did. And now, after that was sold, this is what I do. Leaders Team is actually the company that does this kind of transformational leadership with organizations like that. My experience at Canada Brokerlink showed me that this is one of the only things I've ever seen that can make that kind of a difference in a multi-office organization like that, going through acquisitions and mergers. How do you bring this team together? And it's one of the most impossible tasks. Adam and I had a great conversation with a venture capital leader the other day, and he said, it's funny. I've got a great finance background. I've worked in New York. I understand acquisitions. And all I seem to deal with these companies is people. And we said, yeah, performance at the end of the day is really about people. You can have a lot of things in your company that are good, but if your people don't perform, the company doesn't perform. It's just that simple. So that's what we were up to. That's what we accomplished. It was quite a ride, and we enjoyed it, learned a lot from it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd be interested in having answers to, but we're here. Adam, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add as well. I should have said, Adam also was with us. Then he left to do something else. And then he saw that we really needed help. So he came back. And then when I left, he said, if you leave, you better take me with you. And here we are. We're back together working again since last year. And it's quite a ride. We're having a lot of fun again. So anyway, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I thought of, John, was maybe a little bit of color on the vendors that we worked with in a technical standpoint. You know, we had an in-house legal with Terry, and you know, how did that relationship between the technical operational experts and then bringing in the guys like Brian and some of the leadership development work that we now do full time? Can you add a little bit of color how those technical people and then the organics cultural people work together?
Sure. Yeah, it's good, Adam, because the reality is that all of those technical pieces, whether it's finance, legal, IT, all those pieces have to be in place. But the work that we were doing from a transformational leadership side, as opposed, instead of being opposed to or, you know, contrary to what they were trying to accomplish, it was supportive. An example, both on the IT side and on the finance side. On the finance side, there's always a tendency to say, well, we need the brokerage offices, we need the branch offices to report this way. We need this information, and this is what you have to do. And with the transformational leadership work we did, I went to my CFO and we said, like, hey, they're your customers. You need to explain to them why you need what you need, and then you ask them to do it because it's going to make a difference. And why should they do it? What's in it for them? And they really got that they needed to have that relationship with all of their constituents. And same with IT, and, you know, if they're going to change an operating system or whatever, it was always looking at how it's going to occur to the rest of the organization so that they could feel heard. Again, they felt considered. They felt that they were being looked after in the organization, and it worked really well. And in different deals we've done since, we've seen the same thing where you're trying to bring people together and you've got lawyers and accountants trying to make the thing work. But it's the work that we are able to do with the leadership team or the vendors or others that has them see why they're making decisions the way they are. What's in the way of them actually, you know, agreeing to make something happen. Sometimes they just get really stubborn about something and they don't even know why. But the work we do makes a big difference. I hope that answered your question, Adam. I'm sorry if I didn't.
Yeah, it was good elaboration.
Yeah, John, I have a question. I'm just curious, you know, you took over 30 companies, and from the IT point of view, you may, I don't know how many different systems you had, but to integrate that into one in 12 months sounds incredibly efficient. And I wondered how, you know, how you did that and how people have to relearn what they were doing.
Yeah, well, first of all, if I gave you the impression it happened in 12 months, that would have been a lie because it didn't. When I took over, it was about 2000, and it probably took us about 3 years to get that done because we had to kind of do it systematically, like region by region. First, we had to build the infrastructure, and then we had to move people over. The decision to do it and the agreement to do it happened in a shorter period of time. That would have been less than a year. But then the actual, you know, physical movement of all the information, that took a little bit longer. Yeah.
Did that factor into your due dil when you were looking at all these potential companies to merge?
Well, it certainly did once I took over. I'm not sure that it was a consideration before because they were kind of letting people just do their own thing. Which can work to an extent, but you can't centralize doing that.
But there must have been a huge cost involved, you know, to change these systems and to integrate them into. I'm just curious because in due deal, it's one of the things that people sometimes forget. You know, there's patents and trademarks they forget are running out, and they buy this company, whatever. IT's another one where you know, people agree we're gonna get together, and you're buying my company, and let's go play golf, okay?
Yeah,
and then, of course, they have two incompatible systems, and it becomes, you know, 6 figures and I don't know, time and whatever to, you know, to get it right. So.
Very expensive. The actual movement to the centralized system, there was a cost of that, of course, But then the building of the server farm and the server room, I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that was just sunk cost. And you don't really get a tremendous uptick from that part of it over time. You know, that's really tough. Now, when we did the final sale to ING, that was when things were cloud-based, and they actually did shift everything into the cloud. And so we were able to eliminate the server farm, and that just made life so much simpler. But yeah, you're right. There's that, and there's the other thing is brokers or vendors that have been around a company for a long time. What's the big question, or what's the big thing they always say? I don't want anything to happen to my people. And then what is whoever's trying to do the buying is out there saying, don't worry, we'll take care of them. Well, then when you try to centralize, it's like, yeah, well, we can't have 15 commercial managers in 15 offices. We need to consolidate. We need to reduce costs. But it really gets hard when you're not set up properly in the sales process. So, yeah, you're right.
So, Lorraine, do you have any questions?
So we have a question. From David. So I'm gonna read the question. Thank you for sharing your awesome experiences. How did you approach marketing for the new targets? Did you grow online advertising sales with the smaller brokers, or probably couldn't not invest in the digital side?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was very little marketing per se. Most of it was third party. In other words, articles in insurance magazines about what we were up to. And then it was us going out and analyzing brokers. One of the advantages we had was that our insurer partners, so if we had $30 million of revenue with a company, say Travelers Insurance, they would come to us and they would say, you know what, there are these 4 brokers that we're dealing with that are looking for some kind of a transaction. And here's the history, and here's what and we would get introductions to potential vendors from the insurance companies. So it was a little different, and it worked out really well for us at that time.
I think the other part of that question, John, is as we acquired new brokers and they became part of the whole entity, how did we support them in growing their businesses? And online hadn't really gotten a hold at that time. It wasn't a digital marketing process at that time for new customer acquisition or growth of sales.
No, that's right. And so in fact, it wasn't so much a marketing strategy that we had from an outbound sales and that sort of thing for the individual brokers. It was giving them access to more markets, having them be more competitive in their current environment, because whatever they were doing was causing people to come to them to get quotes on insurance. If they had only 3 markets, they only had 3 choices. When they had access to 6 or 8 markets, now they have a lot more choice and they're way more competitive than they were before. So it was what we were trying to do was increase their ability to compete, and also centralizing systems so they had a better product to send out. Whether it was the way they got quotes out to customers, the way they interacted with customers from an IT perspective, all of those things we tried to ramp up. So customer service and the actual ability to have multiple products, so they were more competitive. That was the angle that we worked on, as opposed to external marketing. And like Adam said, since then, there's been a lot more activity, around online marketing and things.
John, I've got a question here. Was there an earnout on that deal? And if so, did you guys earn the earnout, and how long was the earnout, or percentage wise of the total purchase price?
Well, it wasn't an earnout per se, Greg, but what happened with most vendors would sell, say 50, 60, 70% of the shares to Canada Brokerlink, and then they would take shares in exchange. So they were riding along, right? They vended into the deal so that they were still part of the deal and had the upside opportunity. When Allianz bought, that all disappeared. That was the unfortunate thing. But that's how it worked, as opposed to a direct earnout. Yeah, share swap.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Good.
John, another issue. I'm just wondering, I guess what influence social media had on your marketing. Did you get into that early on, or you didn't feel it was necessary, or were some of your acquisitions into social marketing, into social media, or most weren't, or what was the the social media factor in your growth?
Yeah, you've got to think that when I exited, that was 2007, right? That's 14 years ago. And so social media really wasn't playing much of a role at that point in time. There was an impact, though, on our ability to buy. And that was because when an insurance company purchased the brokerage network, there was a lot of press and a lot of conversation about now a broker is owned by an insurance company. Are they independent? You know, can they still operate the same way? And, you know, all those types of things, which really caused a lot of problems. So there was more press issues on our ability to grow than we dealt with actual social media and selling and things like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Brom, because, you know, Facebook founded in 2004 and didn't really get global traction for a few years after that. And Jon and I were leaving Canada Brokerlink in 2007. We were old school social media, and Jon pointed to the road shows that we did and the cafe tours that we did, both with our senior leadership team and bringing people together face to face, and then going on the road into brokerage communities and collecting people together and having that be the transmission. And then we published a newspaper that got distributed. And we also created an internal intranet for services and bringing everybody together to be able to communicate. So you know, the question's awesome because it kind of happened after, but without the foundation that we put in place, I don't think you'd see the success of social media today in that industry.
Mm-hmm.
So where is the company now in terms of, you know, where it's at in the market, or it's owned? No, it's owned by
Intact.
Intact.
Yeah.
So it's a whole other scale. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things I didn't mention that was really interesting and why the insurance companies were able to buy is because brokerages operate and they make a profit from their operations. They sell insurance for insurance companies, and the insurers make a profit on their book, on their side. If an insurer buys a broker and is able to convert a bunch of business into their account, there's an uptick on their side because they don't have to, there's a cost of acquisition of that business in the market generally. And when they're able to buy a brokerage and offset that with revenue from the brokerage and get a book of business to move into their portfolio, they get a lift on that. So they could pay a higher margin. And in fact, insurance companies can buy brokers much more effectively and profitably than a broker can buy a broker, which has caused a whole different disruption in the industry now. Brokers have really struggled to buy another broker. Insurance companies are the ones that are actually buying them. So it's quite a transition in the industry.
So they're retail and wholesale, as we would say in other businesses.
Well done.
They've got it both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And it depends on how far you push that, because of course, in any vertical integration, you know, when you don't earn the right to do business with each other and you're instructed to do it or forced to do it, it doesn't work as well. And so they've been treading that line very carefully, and I think successfully so far. But yeah, it's been really, the manufacturer distributor relationship is an interesting one in a vertical integration for sure.
Was there a serious culture gap when Allianz, with a German company, took over in terms of, you know, Southwestern Ontario culture?
Yeah, there was, and certainly from a Western Canadian culture too. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school, but Allianz had this thing where they said, think globally, act locally. Except whenever they bought somebody, they brought someone from Germany in to be the CEO.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a second, so there was a struggle from a cultural perspective. And it was my first experience with, I had always had my finance team report to me. And all of a sudden my finance team had a direct relationship to the CFO in Germany. And they didn't really report to me. I had a dotted line relationship with my CFO. And that was my first experience with that. And it was a little strange.
Yeah. The other thing is, after your transaction had concluded as well, Jon, Allianz had terminated its F1 sponsorship as well.
That's right.
That's right.
It ended in 07, Allianz. That was a good team. And then it just
Yeah.
poof, went away.
I will say one thing, that I was fortunate. They hadn't got rid of it before I left. So
You got
I
to
was
go
able-
to,
I was down in Montreal in the pits, and
Yep.
yeah, and helicoptered off to the airport after and all that good stuff.
very nice. I know I've
Once
been to
in
the,
a life-
I was at the 2003 race, and I was able to get a pit jacket from Michael Schumacher.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
Schumacher was
cool.
driving
So
there.
that was pretty nice. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, John and Adam. That was a very nice story. It was told in a nice folksy way, and I'm sure that the audience truly enjoyed it. So I want to just give you a heartfelt thanks from the Calgary M&A Club and from the National M&A Club of Canada. And Bram, did you have any final parting words for the group?
Well, I don't really for the group, except again, on a personal level. I mean, you know, depending on the author, 40 to 70% of mergers don't work, right? Within a year or within 2 years, whatever it is. So you guys have really, you know, you're the exception. It's a great credit to you, and it's a large. I mean, the figures are large, especially for Canada. You know, in the States, if you do $100 million in revenue, it's a small company, you know. But in
Right.
Canada, we start to do a few $100 million. It's pretty significant, and it's a great credit to you. It's a great story, and I thank you for sharing it, really. And I hope we have you back and find out what you're next up to. And thanks, Greg, for bringing this to us. Really,
Great.
This is valuable for everyone. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you, Adam and John, again. And take care, everybody, and have a great summer. The Calgary Vancouver group is going to reconvene. I don't know if we have anything planned for, well, we have nothing planned for July right now. Maybe in August, depending upon how things go with Cindy Laval and our discussions
Yeah, I just want
with
to
the
mention.
Vancouver chapter.
Thanks, Greg, for reminding me. We have three tech entrepreneurs tomorrow. Two from Kitchener-Waterloo. One actually is an ex-client of mine in Montreal. He's in the biometrics, what I call it, biometrics market research. You know, so measuring skin reaction and nose reaction and how you hold your iPhone reaction and eye movement and all this stuff. But he's got it in a different way, and it's most interesting. And there's two tech entrepreneurs from Kitchener-Waterloo. After that, June 29th, we have a super interesting panel. You know, are really high-level people, women and men, from talking about business, Canadian business and investment opportunities in Asia. And that's also 4 really interesting people and a super interesting moderator. And that's June 29th. But in Eastern Canadian time, it's 7 p.m. because it's 7 a.m. the next day in Hong Kong.
Oh, yeah.
Where 2 of them are actually. So one of them really does a lot of business. He's a French national from France, but he's based in Hong Kong, but he's in back and forth to Europe all the time. He's a global investment guy. He's global M&A guy. Anyway, very interesting. That's coming up June 29th. If you want to hear about it, we also have on that panel the acting consul general in Hong Kong and Macau. So anyway, it's a bunch of interesting people. So that's what's going on. And Greg, I have to speak to you offline about a deal which came to me, which might be interesting for John and Adam, but I'll run it by Greg first, and he can do the vetting. Okay.
Hey,
Excellent.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thanks.